The 5 minutes that decided the Cuban Missile Crisis. These men are not drowning. They are not burning. They are dying slowly in a machine built to keep them alive. And every one of them could end it in a minute by doing the one thing they refused to do. They will not surface, because surfacing means being seen. And they have not been told what waits above them for 4 days. 4 days of silence from Moscow, which leaves one question they cannot answer and cannot survive: whether the war has already begun. Inside that tube is the answer to the silence: a torpedo with roughly the force that erased Hiroshima. And the captain has just decided to fire it. Launching it takes 3 men. 2 have already agreed. Everything now rests on a man history was never supposed to name. What he does in the next 5 minutes is the reason you are alive to watch this. The world believed the danger lived in this room. 2 leaders, 1 decision, a single button, and a single man who might press it. They had it exactly backward. Because by this Saturday morning, the 2 men everyone was watching had quietly made the same private choice. Neither of them wanted this war. Kennedy was hunting for an exit. Khrushchev was already drafting one. Which raises the only question that matters on this day. If the men at the top had both stepped back, who was still marching the world toward the edge? A war is not one decision. It is 10,000 of them, made by men whose names presidents never learn. And on this single day, in 3 places their leaders could not see, 3 of those men were about to lose control of it completely. 1 in the sky over Cuba, 1 in the sky over Russia, and 1 still waiting in the dark at the bottom of the Atlantic. Major Rudolf Anderson had flown over Cuba before. His photographs were the reason the world knew the missiles were there. This morning, he was sent back to learn one thing: whether they were ready to fire. He would not come home with the answer. On the ground, a Soviet commander watched the American cross the island and made a decision that was not his to make. Rudolf Anderson became the first man to die in the crisis. He would also be the only one. And the order that killed him had never come from Moscow. Khrushchev did not know it had happened, but Washington could not know that a local commander had acted alone. They heard only the sound they had dreaded for 12 days, the first shot. The invasion of Cuba sat finished on the table. All it lacked was a reason. The room believed it had just been handed one. And while Washington argued over the sky, no one in that room knew that the deadliest thing on Earth that afternoon was 2,000 miles away, underwater. An American anti-submarine group had cornered something in the water. Their orders were routine: force it up, photograph it, send it home. They were dropping charges the size of a hand grenade. Warnings, the naval version of knocking on a door. They were certain the message was obvious. Inside the submarine, no one had received that message. Cut off, suffocating, 4 days without Moscow. The men in the dark did not hear knocking. They heard the sound of being killed. And there was one fact about that submarine the Americans dropping those charges did not know. It was carrying a nuclear weapon, which meant the polite knocking on the hull could end 100 million lives. And the men doing the knocking had no idea. The same morning, on the far side of the planet, a second American spy plane was in trouble. Its mission was harmless, sampling the upper air near the North Pole for traces of Soviet nuclear tests. Its pilot was navigating by the stars, and the Aurora was lying to him. Without knowing it, at the worst hour of the most dangerous day of the century, he flew straight into the Soviet Union. Soviet fighters rose to shoot him down. American fighters rose to bring him home. And on this day, the American missiles carried nuclear warheads, with the decision to use them pushed down to a single pilot's judgment. Now see it the way Moscow saw it. An American aircraft, deep inside Soviet airspace, at the exact moment two nations stood one nerve from war. From a bunker, that shape has only one name: the scout that flies in before the strike. He was laughing because there was nothing left to do. Two superpowers, both desperate to step back and neither able to stop its own machines from lunging forward. That was two of them. Two skies. One morning. The third machine was still underwater, and it was the closest of them all. Fourth day submerged. The oxygen was running out. Men were fainting at their posts, and still, nothing from Moscow. Captain Savitsky had spent 4 days trapped with a single question and no facts to answer it. In the dark, cut off from the entire world, he reached the only conclusion the silence would allow. He gave the order to ready the nuclear torpedo. Everything the world would become now depended on the one man in that compartment who had not yet spoken. Launching took the agreement of 3 men. The captain had decided. The political officer agreed. Under the normal rules, that was enough. But nothing about this submarine on this night was normal. Vasily Arkhipov was not an ordinary second-in-command. He commanded the entire flotilla, and he happened to be riding aboard this one boat, which meant that here, on B-59, nothing could be fired unless he also said yes. And Arkhipov had spent the last hour watching the 2 men beside him break. For the next 5 minutes, in a language no American would hear for 40 years, 2 men argued about the end of the world. Arkipov's case was cold and simple. The charges were too small, too spaced to be a real attack. Surfacing to look was not surrender. And a captain who had been suffocating in the dark for 4 days was the last man alive who should decide to start a nuclear war. He said no, and then he had to make no survive the next 4 minutes. And here is the cruelty of that night. At the exact hour, Arkhipov was refusing to end the world by accident. The world was being quietly saved on purpose. A few 100 miles above his head, a secret trade, American missiles out of Turkey in time for Soviet missiles out of Cuba. Peace, made in a dark room that the public would not learn of for years. Rescue was that close, and not one man in the submarine could hear a word of it. We do not know Arkhipov's final words in that compartment. We know only what happened after them. The submarine rose into a ring of the very ships it had almost destroyed. They photographed it. They watched it turn for home. And they sailed away, never knowing how close they had come, or that there had been a warhead down there at all. The man who stopped it would carry that night quietly for the rest of his life. The world would not learn his name until he was gone. The next morning, Radio Moscow read a statement. Khrushchev would withdraw the missiles. The world, never told how near it had come, began to breathe again. History filed it away as 13 days of nerve. 2 brave leaders who stared into the abyss and blinked in time. That is not quite what happened. What happened is that on a single Saturday, the war tore free of its leaders 3 separate times, in the sky over Cuba, in the sky over Russia, and beneath the Atlantic. And each time, it was stopped not at the top, but by luck, and by the nerve of men no president would ever name. Vasily Arkhipov went home. He was given no medal. He was told, in effect, to say nothing. His submarine had been found, and being found was its own kind of disgrace. He served on. He was promoted in time. He died an ordinary man in an ordinary town, decades later. The world did not learn what he had done until long after his death, until the archives opened, and the men who stood in that compartment finally spoke. There is no monument where it happened. There could not be. It happened underwater, in the dark, in a place no one was ever meant to see. So the next time you are told the Cuban Missile Crisis ended because 2 great men chose peace, remember that it also survived, Because a third man, in a dying submarine, in the space of 5 minutes, chose silence, and then kept that silence for the rest of his life.